Trade relations. Trade relations between the U.S. and South Korea have been under serious strain lately. South Korea's trade minister arrived in Washington on an important mission to secure exceptions to the Trump administration's tariff policy. The situation is difficult, given that the U.S. tariff measures affect not only traditional rivals like China, but also its closest allies. Trump, who recently announced his intention to impose additional duties, is also applying a tough tariff policy to partners in the Asia-Pacific region. This is especially sensitive for South Korea, whose economy is heavily dependent on steel and automobile exports to the U.S. Interestingly, Japan, which has also been affected by U.S. tariffs, has taken a different stance, advocating for a retaliatory increase in duties. Seoul has chosen a more cautious approach, seeking to avoid a serious blow to its exports. South Korean authorities are taking steps on the diplomatic front. In parallel with the talks in Washington, cooperation with Canada is developing in the energy and metallurgy sectors. This can be regarded as a tactical move, demonstrating to the U.S. the existence of alternative partners. Tensions in trade relations arose after the Trump administration noted a serious trade deficit between the two countries. Key export sectors under threat. The U.S. and South Korea's key export sectors, steel, automotive, and electronics industries, are at risk. Some South Korean companies have already announced their readiness to expand production capacity in the U.S. or even take on additional costs from the tariffs. However, it is clear that the main goal remains to obtain tariff exemptions. The current situation is especially sensitive for Seoul since a significant part of South Korea's foreign trade is with the U.S. and Europe. Any increase in tariffs would put pressure on the economy, which until recently enjoyed the benefits of a free trade agreement with the U.S. Political and economic pressures. Trade relations between South Korea and the U.S. have been going through a difficult period of late. The South Korean trade minister arrived in Washington for talks with the Trump administration amid growing tensions over tariffs on steel and aluminum. The situation is particularly challenging for steel giants, which export a significant portion of their products to the U.S. Instead of leaving the U.S. market, they are actively lobbying to maintain their presence. Political instability in Korea has led to companies conducting personal lobbying rather than relying entirely on the ministry. In this situation, the Canadian factor is beginning to play a special role. South Korea has long had diplomatic and economic cooperation with Canada. Recently, contacts have been intensified in the energy and steel industries. Canada's rich oil resources offer South Korea an alternative supply route, and Korean steelmakers could use Canada to enter the North American market. There is a view in the Trump administration that Korea, which receives significant security support from the United States, should be fairer on trade issues. The American side argues that the foundry industry has excess production capacity, and that some products are delivered to the United States at dumping prices, diplomatic maneuvers, and possible compromises. The minister in Washington is seeking to introduce the win-win formula. It is proposed to increase energy imports from the United States, support American farmers, or conclude a joint production agreement in the automobile sector. The idea is to obtain tax breaks in exchange for the protection of American economic interests. The Korean press emphasizes the critical importance of the visit, given Seoul's limited diplomatic leverage. A deterioration in relations with the United States could pose a serious risk to Korea's security, especially in the context of the North Korean threat. Historically, South Korea has relied on American military support, making these talks especially delicate and important for both sides. A serious standoff is brewing in global trade, and South Korea has found itself in the midst of a trade war with the United States. Seoul is in an extremely delicate situation. On the one hand, the country cannot afford an open confrontation with Washington due to the incomparable scale of their economies. On the other hand, it is forced to seek ways to protect its interests. The situation in South Korea is also heating up. The opposition is calling on the government to diversify economic partnerships to reduce dependence on the United States, while the corporate sector is eager to maintain a strategic partnership with Washington. Some companies have even publicly declared their lack of confidence in the government and have begun independent negotiations with the American administration through their own lobbying offices. Strengthening ties with Canada. In these circumstances, the rapprochement between South Korea and Canada is of particular importance. Canada has some of the largest reserves in the world, while Seoul has traditionally depended on Middle Eastern oil. Korean steel giants are also considering the Canadian market as a potential gateway to North America. However, this maneuver is not going unnoticed in Washington. The Trump administration, pursuing an America First policy, is reviewing trade agreements with key partners and is closely monitoring the development of relations between Canada and South Korea. Such a rapprochement could be perceived as an attempt to circumvent U.S. tariff barriers. This situation is part of a larger picture of a global trade standoff, where the Trump administration is seeking to protect the U.S. manufacturing sector with high tariffs on imported goods. Future scenarios and trade relations. Recently, trade relations between the U.S. and South Korea have been going through difficult times. South Korea is actively seeking exemptions from U.S. tariffs, understanding that this is a matter of economic survival for the country. The situation is reminiscent of events in other regions where countries must balance between U.S. pressure and economic diversification. The South Korean government is in a difficult position. On one hand, it needs to maintain access to the critically important U.S. market. On the other, there is growing public discontent with the constant concessions made to the U.S. Major Korean companies like Samsung and Hyundai could suffer significantly if an agreement on tariff exemptions is not reached. While some experts call for concessions to maintain relations with an indispensable partner, South Korea is also developing relations with Canada. Ottawa, with its vast natural resources and modern manufacturing infrastructure, appears to be an attractive partner. Negotiations on expanding trade have intensified, especially in the oil, gas, and metallurgical industries. However, it is impossible to completely replace the American market with the Canadian one. The Korean economy is too dependent on exports to the United States. In addition, the problem of North Korea remains, where American support is extremely important. A significant part of the population believes that it is thanks to the United States that South Korea has reached its current level of development. Nationalists, however, are outraged by what they see as humiliating concessions in the face of global economic turbulence and the tightening of American trade policy. Everyone is looking for new rules and flexible strategies. South Korea is developing relations with Canada to mitigate the negative impact of American tariffs, but it is still difficult to imagine South Korea without close ties to the United States. The most realistic scenario is probably to reach a compromise with the American side while diversifying trading partners. This approach will reduce risks and maintain economic stability. Conclusion. In today's issue, we have examined an interesting situation in international trade, where South Korea is trying to find a middle ground between U.S. pressure and the search for new partners. As one of the largest players in the world market, ranging from smartphones to cars, from steel products to semiconductors, South Korea is now in a difficult position. On one hand, the Trump administration is threatening tariffs. On the other, new opportunities for cooperation with Canada are opening up. Canada, with its vast reserves of energy and minerals, could become a key partner for South Korea. If rapprochement between the two countries accelerates while American tariffs remain in place, we could see the formation of entirely new trade routes and supply chains that could significantly change the economic landscape of both North America and Asia. Now, all eyes are on the talks between the Korean minister and the Trump administration's trade team. Will Korea receive an exemption from tariffs, or will the talks reach a dead end? What do you think? Will South Korea's strategy to fight tariffs work, or will Washington's pressure only intensify? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. We will continue to monitor the development of these global trade tensions. We hope diplomacy will prevail and trade wars will end. Until next time.